Hi, my name is Jerry with Christian Preppers, where the motto is feed them, don't shoot them, so that we can help people and lead them to Jesus so that they can be saved. And if you get a chance, check out some of my other videos so that you can understand that what I'm trying to do with this channel is build communities all over the country so that if anything was to happen, that we can essentially be the first people there to help. So before we kind of get into the improvised tourniquets, I want to share a story about sort of my introduction to using a tourniquet on a human being for the first time, and the impact it kind of had and so on. So I went to Ukraine at the beginning of the war to try to live out my faith. I wanted to just tell people about Jesus Christ, about how He is the Savior, and do that by actually helping people and showing people that I don't even know you, but I love you, and I want you to know that God loves you. So I'm here to do whatever I can. Now, as it turns out, I kind of knew how to use tourniquets. I'm a first aid instructor. I also teach a course called Stop Life-Threatening Bleeding, which is kind of similar to Stop the Bleed. I teach another course which involves wound packing and tourniquet use as well. So when I got over there and I'm kind of teaching people how to use a first aid kit and how to use a tourniquet and stuff like that, it was interesting how God just used it. So what happened is we were in this place called Trust-in-Yets, and the Russians had just withdrew that morning, and we got there probably about 3:30 the afternoon, I think it was. Maybe we got there a wee bit before that. Maybe we got there 1:30 when we got there, and we basically found the local church. We started getting set up. So as we're getting set up to distribute food and see what we could do to help people, especially if, helping get some of the infrastructure, or we could, I don't know, fix a water line or bring water or whatever we could do. We were just trying to get a lay of the land. And this was my introduction to the front lines. And as we're setting up, the guys that I was with, they knew I had a pretty significant first aid kit, and I had already showed these guys how to use everything that was in it. So whenever the military showed up and they're asking for what I thought was a first aid kit, I ran to the truck and got my first aid kit. But because there's a language barrier and I didn't really understand what was going on, when I went over to the military truck to hand them my first aid kit, they literally grabbed me and pulled me into the truck. So first aid kit and all. So anyway, I figured out pretty quickly is that they thought I maybe was more skilled and experienced than what I actually was. So anyway, off we went. So we literally went to where the front lines were, where as the Russians were pulling back, they were setting booby traps so that the Ukrainian military couldn't pursue them. And as they were doing that, unfortunately, some of the civilians that were trying to get out of the way of the fighting were tripping some of these booby traps. And that's the scene that they brought me to. So as we pull up, there's people on the road walking towards us, and there's lots of blood. So with a head injury, they just seem like they bleed a lot. So I was just, this is trial by fire, and felt totally out of my depth. But I asked God if He could use me when I was there, and here's what appeared to be an opportunity. So I got out and I started treating this guy, and then I was trying to just ask, like, what's going on? Is there anybody else more, seriously injured? And they pointed to back where our truck was, and somehow I didn't see the woman when I got out. I just got tunnel vision. So, I didn't really manage my nervous system very well, because I got so focused on this guy with all this blood running down his face that was my go-to, was to go to him. So I learned so much in that situation. So anyway, I got him sort of bandaged up, and then I'm asking, and they said back there. So there was a woman, and she was just off the road about 9 feet or whatever the case is. I picked her up. I brought her onto the road. I could see she was really badly injured. Normally I would just treat a person there, but of course all the booby traps were in the softer ground. So I wanted to make sure I didn't find myself in any more trouble. So it was a really good learning experience to observe your surroundings. So anytime that you're in a situation where you're treating someone, you have to be really careful about situational awareness. I'm going to make a whole video on that, but I might as well just throw a part of it in there, because it's part of my story. Is getting her on something solid, something where I could treat her, so that if I did have to do CPR, I'm not pushing her into a soft material. I'm on something hard where I'm going to get good chest compressions. It was wintertime, so I could see that her clothing was just leaking blood. And she was a relatively thin Ukrainian woman. Most Europeans are significantly thinner than Americans, and the further east you go, the skinnier I think they actually get. I'm just basically, trying to figure out what's going on. And, I'm a Western guy and I know what the training is. You got to cut off the clothing, do a full inspection and all this kind of stuff. And I could see blood all down the left side of her body, and that how she had been peppered, so to speak, with the shrapnel. So whatever booby trap, whatever it was, it spat shrapnel out and peppered her in the left side. So I basically I could take our winter coat off, I unzipped it, but then everything else I had to cut off. I could see that the leg was bleeding the worst. So I got my tourniquet out and I started putting the tourniquet on the lady. Went 2 to 3 inches above the wound, and it appeared that it was shrapnel, and it was in the leg, and it was in deep enough where I couldn't really see it. So I just went ahead and applied the tourniquet. So now when I was applying the tourniquet to this lady and I was tightening it down, as much pain that she was clearly in and needing some solace or some consolement, when I started tightening that tourniquet, it was clearly the thing that was hurting her the most. And I think this is really important when it comes to understanding how to put on a tourniquet and how the person is probably going to react. They're probably going to react in a lot of pain. So at this point, this woman who seemed like she was maybe about to lose consciousness, when I was putting the tourniquet on, she came right back. She came right back and she's kind of fighting me. She's kind of pulling up my arms, trying to get me to stop. And I'm pretty sure that she was saying, stop, in Russian or whatever the case was, and saying some different things. And then I got her husband to help hold her as I was making sure that I could, get the tourniquet on and make sure I got it fully tightened down. I didn't want to try to get this tourniquet on and then have her pull it out of my hands or pull my hand away and have the thing unravel and then maybe blow out some clotting that's already starting to take place. Because when you put a tourniquet on, you might find that the blood will just clot very quickly. Sorry, I've got fruit flies all over the place here. So she's really in a lot of pain. And, in my classes, I use this as a scenario. So I say to the guys, so when do I stop putting that tourniquet on? Because she's screaming, she's in pain. Should I hold off? Should I ease off a wee bit? And it's interesting. Most of the people in the class get it. And they say no. They say, no, you don't stop until the bleeding has stopped. So that's one of the first things that I want to kind of share here when it comes to using a tourniquet is you don't stop until the bleeding stops. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this here with improvised tourniquets is because I want to share something. During the Boston bombing, the report that I was found, and I don't even really fully know if these reports are accurate or not. I don't really know how I would even verify these, but I read one report that said that 22 improvised tourniquets were put on during the Boston bombing, and they said that all 24 of them failed. Now, I kind of do want to talk about that a wee bit, because these guys are saying that 24 tourniquets were put on and all 24 failed. Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm going to pause this to get this sun out of my eyes. Okay, much better. All right, so in that class, that's basically what I'm trying to relay is that we don't stop until the bleeding is stopped. But in the Boston bombing, they said that all 24 of those failed. But here's the deal. What is considered a failure? When it comes to an improvised tourniquet. And I want to kind of address this because if you slow the bleeding down, I don't consider that a failure. When you're in a high stress situation and maybe being able to put on an improvised tourniquet of some kind, even if you can't get the bleeding to fully stop, if you have significantly slowed it down, and the fact that you're putting the tourniquet on above the wound, closest to the heart, then the truth is that you still have access to apply pressure. So you can still pack that wound, you can still apply pressure. If that thing is still bleeding because you're not shutting off all the blood, and for whatever reason you can't turn, you're going to make an improvised windlass. So this, I've got this and this as windlasses, and what those do is those are the tourniquet part, right? So the part that actually turns, that actually will lock down and create so what you're doing is you're shrinking you're shrinking the material, and you're shrinking until you've got almost like a rubber band, like constriction type situation where it's constricting to eventually collapse the vein. And even though I've said in another video, I don't know if you're going to watch that video or not, so I'll explain, is that your arteries are essentially the size of your pinky. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to essentially compress the pinky, and you're trying to collapse it. So you've got this gap, and you're trying to collapse the gap to stop the blood from flowing through. The best way to think of it is like a garden hose, where you're stepping on the garden hose to compress the garden hose to stop the water from coming out the other side. So that's what you're doing. So imagine you step on the garden hose and you close the hole up this much, where there's still some blood coming out, but it's dramatically reduced. So I don't know if I would say that an improvised tourniquet has failed because it doesn't completely shut off the blood, if it has significantly reduced it. Because you still have access to the wound, so you can still apply pressure, you can still put some packaging in there, you can still do other things to try to completely shut off that blood. But by putting on the tourniquet, you might have actually bought yourself some time. Because as I said, blood loss or bleeding is the largest cause of preventable death. So traumatic injuries with bleeding are the largest cause of death in America. And as I said, it doesn't always, it's not always external. A lot of times the bleeding can be internal, and there's not a whole lot you can do for that. But a lot of times the bleeding is external, and that's where you get that blood flow, where you're going to need a tourniquet, you're going to need to pack the wound, you're going to be able to do something to try to stop that bleeding. So if you're a medical professional, because I'm not, right? I'm just a guy that, that through whatever fate, through the will of God, through whatever situation it was, I just happened to be there where I could help these people. And then some of these situations just kept popping up. But, they're actually not that hard to find when you're literally on the front lines of a war. You're always around death, you're always around injury. So it's often not that far away from you. So in that situation, as much as that woman was screaming, I had to keep going until I felt like the blood was shut off, and then go and look at other injuries that she had. And I'm not going to talk about the other injuries, because that's something else I can talk about in a different thing. I only had to apply one tourniquet for her leg, that I was able to successfully stop the wound from bleeding, and then go on to the other wounds. So we hear about triage, and I kind of failed. I consider that I kind of failed that day at doing proper triage, because it turned out there was another person that was even more seriously injured, and I ended up treating him last, and he didn't make it. But so we talk about triage even within the scope of like different people. But, what I've discovered is that there's really triage even within a individual person with multiple wounds, multiple injuries. So this lady had multiple injuries. So what I was trying to do is I was trying to assess which one is going to kill her the quickest. So that's what we're looking at. And I think you're going to find virtually every single time it's bleeding. So if a person has cut an artery and they've went unconscious, to go ahead and perform CPR and literally be helping to pump that blood out of their body. I believe that the bleeding is the greater injury that you have to address. So if you have a tourniquet, you want to go ahead and put a tourniquet on if that's how you can address that injury. If it's to a limb, if it's somewhere else where you're going to pack the wound, or you're just going to put some kind of pressure on it, then trying to address the bleeding, to me, that's what you're going to from the injuries that I've seen. It's stopping the bleeding was the biggest problem. So if someone's out there, there's all kinds of people that have way more experience than me in this, combat medics, people that have done this hundreds of times, where they've done this. So if there's anyone out there that would want to weigh in on what I'm saying, if there's anything that I'm saying that you feel like should be corrected, please do it. My goal here is not to bloviate and just sound like an expert on YouTube. I'm really not. My goal here is to share my experiences. And then if you can bless, people looking at this video by adding in and saying, hey, look, this is a better way to do it or whatever the case is, please leave a comment. It's really, really important that people get vital information to save a person's life. That's the goal here. The goal here is not to be the best on YouTube. The goal here is to give the right information that will save lives. You know, I'm really hoping that by posting these videos, that by proxy, that somebody picks up a skill from just watching my video that they can then use to save someone else's life. So, yeah, just looked at the time, and these videos are always longer than what I expect, but I'm just trying to give the right information so that there's other things. So you've got to assess your surroundings. You've got to make sure that your situational awareness is clicked in, and that you're not going to put yourself in danger, because that is a real thing. And if you're making an improvised tourniquet and you still see some bleeding, I don't know if it's a good idea, and this is where I was kind of going with this. I don't know if it's a good idea to undo it and try to redo it. That's something that you're going to have to really consider. And if you are going to undo it, if there's any way that you can apply pressure to the injury, and if you're doing, you know, a tourniquet, remember, you've always got your knees. So you can be kneeling on the wound. If it's like, say, a leg or something like that, or even an arm, and you lie the person down and you're doing the, you know, going ahead and addressing the, you know, the tourniquet in an upper portion of the arm or leg, you can be kneeling on the actual wound itself. So you can put your knee right on it and try to shut off the bleeding, you know, or apply pressure by doing that, by putting your tourniquet on. It's just that you would have to, in my opinion, you have to have a high level of certainty that you're going to be able to redo the tourniquet better the second time to ever consider taking it off, because it's probably doing something. It's probably helping in some way, unless you realize you put it over like a kneecap. So if you've put it over a bone of some kind, like a joint, then that's an issue. And in that situation, you're probably not doing anything. So it might be a good idea just to go ahead and take that one off. But the best way to never find yourself in that situation is never put a tourniquet over a joint. In my opinion, you always want to go at least 2 inches above the knee or an elbow if you're going to apply a tourniquet. So here's something else. If there's any possible way to get more material, and the truth is, in most situations, there is usually a way to get more material. So a t-shirt, a pair of pants, anything that it's around that's strong enough that when you actually start to twist and lock it down, that it won't snap or break. If there's anything that you have strong enough to do that, it's going to help with the compression. So all that you would do is you would go 2 to 3 inches above. Some people like to say go right next to it. It's fine if you want to go right next to it. I'm just saying, in a high stress situation, if you're trying to go right next to it, make sure that you move off center to whatever it is that you're using as your windlass. Whatever you're using to turn, you want to make sure you don't hit that. You don't want to disturb that. You don't want to loosen it and not realize it. So you want to move, if you're going to go right next to it, side by side, you want to off-center them a little bit so that you're not, as you turn the windlass on whatever tourniquet you're using, that you're not interacting with the windlass of the tourniquet that you previously put on. In fact, in my opinion, if you have like medical tape or duct tape or anything, you want to tape that sucker up so it doesn't move. All right. Okay, so what are we using here? And I know this might seem interesting, but you don't want to get something that might literally break in the process. So, you know, our screwdriver is great. So a screwdriver like this, these things are awesome. And there's so many different tools that would be around that you could use. I even see people using trauma shears. And in a pinch, if you literally have nothing else, then go ahead and use the trauma shears. If there's literally nothing else that's around that's rigid enough to put in there and make the tourniquet, go ahead and do it. I personally don't like using trauma shears because I use them. You know, so I just give you a scenario where I'm going to try to do an improvised tourniquet and maybe it's not working. Well, maybe I'm going to cut a t-shirt. Maybe I'm going to cut a pair of pants. Maybe I'm going to do different things like that to try to make an additional tourniquet that I'm going to put on. Maybe I find out as I look around that they've got an injury to a leg and an injury to an arm where I need more material. I'm going to be wanting my shears to try to go ahead and help me make more material to make another tourniquet. So I don't like tying up something that's a very, very useful tool. So for me to ever use my trauma shears, it's going to be literally like absolutely last case scenario where I have literally nothing else that I can think of that I would be able to make a tourniquet out of before I would ever use my trauma shears. In saying that, if that's literally all you have, go ahead and use them. Go ahead and use your trauma shears. So in the Pacific Northwest where I live, and let me know in the comments what you think about this information, whether you think it doesn't need to be in here or not, or whatever the case is. What are you going to use? We have a lot of trees around here, like a lot of trees. You don't have to go very far in the Pacific Northwest before you come across a tree. And for a lot of people, there's usually some form of tree, shrub, bush around, whatever the case is. So in my opinion, what you want to do is you want to look for something that's at least an inch in diameter, at least an inch in diameter. You're really going for something that's even a bit bigger than that. So just to give you an explanation, this right here, this is probably about as small as I would ever consider going. So you can kind of see the correlation here between my finger, the size difference. So this is about as small as I would ever want to go for using as a windlass. So this is a piece of plum tree that I have. I have an Italian plum tree, so I just cut this off. One of the things that I want to explain is that when it comes to wood, you guys can see how this is sort of cracking and splitting. So this branch was dead. So dead wood is typically stronger than living wood. Living wood typically has a lot more flex in it. It will bend, and it actually will break easier than dead wood. So there's obviously a sweet spot. So if it's still on the tree and it's been dead for maybe about a year, minimum of a year, maybe no more, literally no more than 2.5 to maybe 3 years, okay, that's probably a perfect piece of wood for making a windlass for a tourniquet. If you have to use something fresh, so here in the Pacific Northwest, we have tons of fruit trees. I have fruit trees on my property. Fruit trees are great, especially when they're dried out a year or two. They are very strong, and they will make an excellent windlass for a tourniquet. Other things that we have around here that are even better is if you get a little piece of maple or oak. But maple is typically excellent because we have so many Oregon broadleafs up here, or broadleaf or large leaf maples, whatever we want to call them. We have so many of them up here that there's a lot of them all over the place. So if you ever are in an area where you kind of come across one of those, just go ahead and cut it. Well, obviously it has to be on your property, right? Or if you have to have permission. Don't just go around cutting people's trees. But I mean, if you come across like a dead branch or something like that, and you can get a piece of that, you can get a stick and you can cut a couple of nice little pieces out and just throw them in the trunk of your car, whatever the case is, or even honestly, even put them in your first aid kit, or just tie it to the outside of the first aid kit, whatever it is. Those are excellent windlasses. And you know what I really like about also getting some maple sticks is they will make really excellent braces. So if you have to immobilize a person's leg, so if you get a couple of longer sticks, depending on the situation, and you're going to use them as a tourniquet, that's great. You can just break a piece off, use it as a tourniquet, go ahead and do it. If you have the longer pieces and you find there's a sprain or even a fracture or something like that, and you want to immobilize the leg, they're also going to work perfectly for that. So just even gathering a couple of pieces of wood, throwing them in your car, keeping them close to your first aid kit, putting it in your backpack, whatever you do, I mean, you've got something right there, right next to your first aid kit that will make an excellent windlass. Because even if you have a couple of tourniquets, because one is never enough, you need two. But even if you find yourself in a situation where it's a mass casualty situation, sometimes just having those couple of sticks that's in the trunk of your car, you could maybe make multiple improvised first aid kits just from simply having 2 sticks in the trunk of your car. Or your truck, or whatever the case is. If you have a truck, I probably wouldn't keep them in the bed though. I just keep them underneath the back seat or somewhere like that. And if you're in the bed, they're going to get wet, they're going to get rained on, they're going to get weathered, and now you're risking them actually breaking. Whereas if they're kept in a cool, dry place, they'll last a long time. So, okay, we're going to get into actually putting on the improvised tourniquets. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm going to use a triangular bandage, which these things are amazing. They really come in so handy in so many different ways. And then I'm going to use just a sort of standard dynamic or stretchable bandage. This is the simplest way to say it, right? So so these are 2 very common things that you find in a first aid kit, and these are excellent things in my opinion that you can use for an improvised first aid kit. Okay, so I have to adjust the camera, so let me go ahead and do that and get set up. Okay, so you got your triangular bondage. Basically, you just start folding it, rolling it up, whichever way you want to do it. And I actually like to keep one of these in my kit that's already kind of rolled up like this, because it's really easy to unroll it if you're trying to make a sling. There's not as much of an emergency, but if you need to use like another improvised tourniquet or just tie something off in some way, then it's already kind of there and ready to go, right? So it's pretty simple process. So we're just going to go under the leg, okay, and then come up. And this part's important, right? Because you want to get as much slack out of this as you possibly can. So we go over and we do what they call a half knot, right? And we're going to pull that down really tight as we can get it. So we're going to take our stick that we're going to use as our windlass here, and then we're just going to come over it and do another half knot. And then if you do another half knot, they call that a whole knot, I guess. And now you're ready to go. So now we're just going to go ahead and start turning. Okay, and we're going to keep turning, and you can already see this thing starting to bite into my leg. This thing, it works really effectively. These bandages are really strong. This thing will absolutely compress. Now, even just with that little bit of tension, like I can feel this cutting in and starting to apply, you know, discomfort at this point. I wouldn't call it pain, but it's definitely discomfort. It's not comfortable to have this, even with just like whatever that turn was that I did, right? So then what you're going to do is you can go ahead and take this and wrap it underneath. Do the same with this guy. Come and wrap it underneath, and then you can tie this off and cinch it down. And you can do that a couple of times if you can get enough material to tie it off. Okay, and that should hold it in place. But here's the deal. I would never trust this. I would never trust just that. So what I will do is, you're going to have some medical tape in your first aid kit as well. Is just go ahead and take your tape, come underneath, okay? And wrap the tape around the leg. And just come over it a couple of times with the tape. So, all right. Now this cloth tape, I really like it because it tears really easy. I really don't like the vinyl tape. So this is an excellent way to go ahead and get this set up. All right, for the sake of time, I'm just going to pause the video here and then get set up for the next one. Okay, took the stick out. Just want to show you, you do the same thing with something like a screwdriver. So on and so on, and then you're just going to keep turning with the screwdriver and do the same thing to lock it off. So you can see how that would work. All right, and I'm going to get set up for the next bondage. Okay, so we got our stretchable bandage. So here's what's important if we're going to do a tourniquet with a stretchable bandage. And something that I kind of like to do is, if you are present of mind, and I'm going to double this over, so I just folded this guy over, is I'm going to try to somewhat get the ends even, so that when I go ahead and do this, I'm going to have roughly the same amount of material on both sides. So I'm taking out all that stretch. This part is really important. Taking out all that stretch, all right? You don't want to be having that stretch working against you when you're trying to get your windlass on. And I'm going to really work on getting all that stretch out as much as I can, okay? I can already feel this. I can already feel the discomfort by having this on there. So in this situation, we're going to start with the screwdriver, right? Come over, going to do my half knot again. It's a little bit more cumbersome when you've got all this extra material to kind of get it on. I'm trying to hold things in place, get that going. So there's my half knot. Come over again to do my full knot. I can already feel that this is in pretty good. This is doing really well. Okay, so now I'm going to start turning. Get my windlass going. I'm gonna probably have to keep trying to hold these and work with them. All right, okay, that's biting pretty good. All right, that's already starting to bite into my leg pretty good. I'm not going to keep going, and here's something I would highly recommend if you're practicing on yourself. Remember, you're starting to compress that vein and close up the gap. So it is possible that your blood can even start clotting pretty quickly. So I actually don't recommend that people do this aggressively on themselves. Don't ever do it on yourself to ever shut off. You can do it and you can get a full understanding with maybe just one, maybe two turns at the most. If you're getting all that slack out, if you're tightening that thing and getting all that slack out, you're going to absolutely feel this with just two turns. So you get the point, okay? And as you release, it's good to maybe move your foot. If you put it on an arm, if you practice with an arm and you've got it on up here, then it's good to just start gently pumping your hand as you're releasing it, just to let the blood flow come through and get through everything nice and evenly. But never, never, in my opinion, fully put on a tourniquet to actually shut the blood flow off. There's absolutely no need, and I think it's dangerous to practice like that. I go to classes and I see guys doing it all the time, and I immediately stop them. Okay, I don't think it's a good idea to ever apply a tourniquet in such a way where you're actually trying to shut the blood flow off. So I picked up a little sliver. Okay, all right. So we're going to do the same kind of thing. We're going to come over with this much material. You can even go just right under the leg again and just come back over the top and just tie off. This thing does not want to move. You know, there's so much material, and I can even tie off underneath the leg here and just make sure that thing's cinched in. This one is on pretty good. Now here's the thing about a compound or bondage like this, is the problem that you've got is you might not be getting this thing back off again. So you might have to cut this off to get it off the patient. So when I said earlier about trying to reset it, you might struggle. If you're using a bandage like this, you might really struggle just to get this material. And I'm gonna have to play with this a little bit to figure this out. So I'm going to save you guys the... Okay, so hopefully there was some good information in there that would help you. Hey, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like me to kind of work on or try to find out about or demonstrate, please leave a comment. Let me know what's going on. I'm trying to grow this channel, and the way that I grow this channel is when you guys give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. That's why you hear people on YouTube always saying that. You know, thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe, is because that's how the algorithm in YouTube works, is that it detects activity. So I want to be able to keep doing these videos, keep growing this channel, continue to reach out to people so that I can start getting people out of the mindset of fear. Everybody sees what's going on in the country. They see that there's a lot of fear in the country. I want to have you focus on being able to actually help people and not worry about, you know, even to a certain degree, not worry about yourself, because when you're doing things in the service of God, He's going to protect you. He's going to take care of you. So yeah, go ahead and leave a comment, subscribe, and help me get this message out. You know, God bless you in Jesus' name.